everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Talk It Out with Pratika Karkwal, a place to hear stories, experiences, and impact in the field of mentoring and mental health. These two are one of the most important causes for today's youth. I am your host, Pratika Karkwal, a current high schooler who is a passionate advocate for these causes and is here to provide you with a place to hear and learn from the inspiring experiences of our guests. We have here with us today Dr. Immanuel Joseph, who got a biochemistry PhD from Tulane University and is a compassion activist. He is a 3 times TEDx speaker, 7 times author, a cancer scientist, and founder of Compassion Leaders, an organization that spreads compassion to workplaces. He's also a certified professional coach and currently a biology teacher in Frisco ISD, doing academic collaborations on stress management and consulting for a virtual reality program that focuses on bringing joy through programming. Whoa, that's a lot, Dr. Joseph. You've done so much wonderful work throughout the years, and I'm so inspired. I'm sure our listeners can relate. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us today. We're excited to dive deeper into mentoring and mental health with you. So,
Thank you for
Doctor,
having me.
huh?
Yeah. I said, thank you for having me. Such a pleasure to be here. And it's wonderful that you are talking about mentoring and mental health at this critical time and space. So keep up the good work. It's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. So, Dr. Joseph was featured on a Voyage Dallas news post, and I was so fascinated after reading it. Dr. Joseph, as we discussed, you first started off as a cancer discovery scientist, then started an in home care agency with a dream of providing exceptional care for the disabled, the seniors, and people at end of life situations. But then there came a turning point in your life and career. So, could you discuss with us a little bit about that?
Certainly, Pratika. So sometimes we take on things that we are not fully prepared for. So this was the situation for me, right? And when I was a cancer scientist and I decided to move on into entrepreneurship, what I wanted to do was do something that had a human impact. And I'd always been fascinated by eating and how do we serve people. I think that's kind of my connecting line in everything that I have done. And but in this particular case, what I realized after starting to work with people who are uh, going through Alzheimer's, going through end of life stages, um, I realized that I was internalizing the pain of others way too much. Doctors and nurses and caregivers, they work with situations like this all the time, but they are prepared for experiences like that. But I was not. And I realized that the hard way. Because what I realized, I had 17 people pass away in my care. I had several people who I had worked with, um, started off in early stage of Alzheimer's. They would go to the point where they could not be at home by themselves. They had to be in a facility. So there were all of these experiences that I witnessed that I was internalizing. And it came to the point that I became clinically depressed. Um, Mainly because I was not willing to acknowledge that I was suffering. What I was doing was, you have this mindset in your generation, probably not as much, but when I was growing up, there was this idea that men don't cry, men don't show emotions. If you suffer alone in your room, but outside you put up this brave front. And so that's what I was doing. And then it came to the point where I couldn't take it anymore, and I had to talk about it, and it was a blessing because my wife, um, who I was able to open up to with vulnerability, she encouraged me. She accepted it, she acknowledged it, and she said, "Let's go and figure out what is wrong." And I did, and I realized I was depressed. And so anyway, the outcome of that was me asking myself, how can I work through this depression? Because this depression came from a place of too much caring, if you can term it that, too much caring, too much internalizing somebody else's suffering. Fortunately, and I was living in the Bay Area at the time. Fortunately, Stanford University was not too far from where I lived, and they had this program called from the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. It's called CCARE, and they had this program called Compassion Cultivation Training. It's an evening program. I used to go for, we go there for several weeks in the evenings, and they teach us about compassion and what it means in a very, very practical way. And that experience kind of made me realize that what I was going through was empathic distress or empathy fatigue, as they call it. And I realized that the antidote for empathic distress was compassion, surprisingly, which is basically stepping away from the emotion of being caught in suffering to actually stepping out into action and saying, what can I do to change things? So that became a saga, a journey of healing for me. Because when I healed, and I realized that by practicing self-compassion and compassion for others, and I can take the existence of universal suffering and challenges and healing in its own stride. So that's what happened. And a part of that and an extension of that was I became a compassion activist because I had experienced joy through the practice of compassion. And I felt it was my duty to actually pass it on. So which is when I created a framework, being a scientist and being my mindset being that I need to conceptualize everything, align it, and create reproducible structures, in which I did, which is what I did. I created a framework for training compassion in workplaces because workplaces, like everything else, has a lot of suffering, and people are unwilling to acknowledge their suffering in workplaces. So that's how I became a teacher for many companies. I went and I taught my ideas, and I still continue to do that in different forms. And my idea of compassion keeps evolving. It's been a beautiful journey.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. And what you said, right, about how first, your depression started off because of empathy, right? Sometimes too much caring, but you had your family as your support system, your wife, and then that compassion training at Stanford really helped you get awareness, which again, you would agree is like the kind of the first step to really overcoming these mental health issues and then taking action. And so I think for you, as you said, taking action was through compassion. So compassion is kind of emotionally detaching yourself and, um, you know, working at it. So making sure that, you feel empathy with people, but then you're taking action. And that's kind of what was a solution, really helped you overcome your mental health issue. And you're like, how can I serve others? As you said, right? You're training in the workplaces and, your healing journey, I would say, kind of became your purpose, as you said, with your compassion advocacy. So that's just wonderfully said. So I definitely agree. Your journey has been very beautiful. So thank you for sharing that with us. So, just kind of adding on to that, can we say that mental health and mentoring from others came together for you and helped you overcome difficulties by contributing to your life?
It most certainly did. See, no man is an island. We are constantly learning from others through others. And the idea of mentoring, if I am a mentor, it comes from the realization that we are all conduits, we are all pipes, right? And we are getting information from the ages, the wisdom from the ages, knowledge that is around us, and we are simply acting as pipes, as conduits for somebody else. And that is all that is. I mean, if you take away the idea of the stories that we tell about our own self-importance on this planet, and we just take this 10,000-foot view of all of us, we are all like pipes. We are all connected like pipes, and we are all feeding into each other, and we are getting through somebody else. So in my own journey of mental health and healing, um, becoming open to my own suffering and becoming open to the possibility that there are others who are healers on this play in this place, um, made me realize that as long as I am willing to receive the wisdom of others, as long as I'm willing to receive the healing of others, then it is possible for me at some point to heal and then become a source of healing for somebody else. So I think the big part of me in my own realization was learning to let go of some elements of my ego, of my conditioning around not accepting help and not showing up as this person who cannot who's invulnerable, and then saying, I am who I am, and let me go through this experience. Suddenly, as I opened up to mentoring and help from others, life shifted for me. So that was my big takeaway, that that even when you're working through mental health challenges, be open to finding the amazing people around you who will come into your life. The universe is connected in fascinating ways, and so when we open ourselves up, um, we will find mentors who will come into our lives and change us for the better.
Yeah, that's wonderfully said, right? As you said, no man is an island, right? We're humans are naturally social beings. We want to connect with others. We want to help others. And I love the analogy, you said of how humans are like pipes. We're all connected to each other, and we feed positive energy to each other. So your mentors, people who helped you in this journey, gave you positive energy, and that really helped, you in the healing journey. But then after that, you, by opening up, you not only got healing from someone, but then you became that healer. So that's kind of showing the power of connections, as you said, and being open, as you said, is putting aside your ego, that, you can be vulnerable, you can ask for help, because nobody's perfect. And it's just, the goal is never to be perfect. It's just to keep progressing forward. So I loved how you shared that with us, because, humans are just, that's just how we are. We need to connect with each other. We need to ask for help and open up. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. So after your experiences, I know you continue this advocacy for the idea of compassion, as we were discussing, by speaking in companies like Facebook, Amazon, Salesforce. You've done TED Talks and written books. So is there something you noticed in your own life or society in general that really drives your advocacy, your vision, and kind of the why behind your advocacy?
Hmm. That's an interesting question. Um, I think each of us are drawn to a certain idea,
Mhm.
right? A certain thing that we completely resonate with. Um, More often than not, when I think about my own legacy and why I'm here and what is my purpose and so on, um, I realize that my fundamental journey is about harmony. It's about creating balance. And I don't know why exactly I resonate with harmony so much, why I resonate so much with peace so much. Um, and again, that's a question that I've never been able to get to the core of, which is also your question. So I don't have a direct answer for that. But what I do know is that's what I've been drawn to. That's where I feel at peace. You know, the amazingly brilliant Nikolai Tesla once said, right, that everything in the universe is energy, frequency, and vibration. And for some reason, I vibrate with the idea that we are all connected, and that we are all energy, and my particular place in this journey is to somehow contribute to that peace, to that vibration, to that harmonious coexistence and connection. So so that's a repeating pattern in everything that I have done in my life so far. And it's probably also, just from, as you asked this question, I'm thinking, is it because I realize that my own survival and my own happiness is built into the survival and happiness of everyone else around me? And do I internally somehow consciously realize that I cannot stretch and pull at this fabric of life without stretching and extending the fabric for somebody else. So I cannot be happy at the cost of somebody else. I cannot thrive at the cost of somebody else. So if I'm suffering, somebody else is suffering, and if they are suffering, so am I. So I think I subconsciously realized that, and maybe that's the why of why I'm trying to go in this direction of sharing my thoughts around compassion and harmonious coexistence.
Yeah, I love what you said about that, right? Everyone has like the purpose. And as you said, it's what you resonate with. It's something that comes genuinely. Sometimes you can't really explain that feeling. It's just something that you really, as you said, kind of vibrates with you. And as you, for in your case, right, you talked about how your survival, it's just not something you're doing, but it's kind of working in this larger picture of society, right? We're all interconnected, as you were sharing with the pipes analogy, and we're all working together. And so that really drives compassion advocacy forward. And I think that's really impactful for our listeners as well, because, and when it comes to compassion, that we're all, connected, and that, our actions influence each other. So it's so important for us to really make sure we're nice to those around us. We're spreading that compassion, because the world is a small place. We all need to make sure we're supporting each other. So, yeah, thank you for that. So, Dr. Joseph, you discuss, write, and advocate about this impactful idea of micro compassions. So, could you just briefly explain what this idea is? And most importantly, how can this idea be relevant and useful to our listeners in their everyday lives?
When people think of compassion, and I talk to them about it, I find some resistance. And the resistance comes in the form, there's so many mental dialogues and stories that people have created around what compassion is and what compassion is not. And one of the misconceptions around compassion is the idea that only grand acts of kindness qualify as compassion. And the smaller ones, the smaller acts of compassion are not. And I want to challenge that purely from a biological perspective, right? Um, if you think of your brain and in its decision making process, let's say you're facing an uncomfortable situation. The part of your brain that immediately responds is your reptilian brain, right? Your fear or flight response. And that's your amygdala is active and it's telling you, okay, let's flight or freeze, right? And so to the untrained brain, that is the reaction for anything that is uncomfortable. But when you have trained your brain, when you have thought about compassion, when you have done a compassionate act a million times, what happens is you're rewiring your brain in your decision making circuitry, your default network, from your amygdala, from your limbic system to your prefrontal cortex. And what you're doing there is you're making executive decisions. And your executive decisions there are saying, giving the benefit of the doubt. They are taking away judgments from the situation. They are helping you feel for the person, but also move that feeling into action. So that's where the idea of micro compassion comes in. So micro compassion are tiny, deliberate, consistent, everyday acts of compassion that are creating neural networks within your brain. And and as you form these connections again and again and again through action, what happens is when you are challenged, when you're facing an uncomfortable situation, instead of moving into that default response of fear and flight, you are now moving away into a compassionate response because your brain has been trained to that. So, in a practical sense, how does that look like? It starts with awareness. It starts with awareness that you're going out of your comfort zone. But if you start looking around, you will see that there is always opportunities for somebody's life to be better. In fact, if you look carefully, you'll realize that your life can be so much better if you pay attention to your suffering and your challenges and so on. And the next thing is to take away judgments from that and then ask a very simple question: how can I alleviate the suffering? What can I do to change the situation? So when you consistently ask these questions, and I know initially it would be a forced action because you're not, that's not your default way of doing things. But as you keep going into this idea of rewiring your brain for compassionate action over a period of time, that becomes you. That becomes your identity. Your thoughts and your actions reflect, and people will sense that you're a compassionate person, and you will realize that you can actually make a difference in your life and everybody else's life. So one simple way to actually put that in action is as you wake up in the morning, right? Um, you make a choice, a conscious choice. If you make that as one of your, instead of reaching out for your phone the first thing in the morning, and you sit down and you spend a few minutes being grateful for all that life has given you, and you think about yourself as a light in whatever darkness that there is that you need to expel. Um, what that enables you to do is somehow your brain believes that that is the reality, and then it starts noticing for patterns, it starts looking for challenges in your life and others lives, and then it says, let's not judge, let's do the right thing. So that tiny sliver of time that you spend in the mornings just reflecting on, can I be a source of compassion in my world today, whatever I go through today, whether I'm going to school, whether I'm on vacation mode, whatever I'm doing, how can I make a little bit of a difference? So that's where micro compassion becomes a way of rewiring your brain and changing your life and those around you.
Yeah, thank you, doctor. That's very impactful because, as you said, right, like these little acts of compassion can make a world of a difference, right? Because you're slowly rewiring yourself from just doing small acts of compassion to just being a compassionate person as a whole, right? Because you're removing judgments. And as you said, you're rewiring your brain, and in your way you're tricking your brain to look at each situation through compassion. It makes you more of an understanding person, and it just helps you, as he said, connect with others, right? Create that harmony. And you can not just be compassionate, to others around you, but you can also just start by being compassionate to yourself, as you said, right? How you can be grateful for what you have, and see what is my purpose in today's world. And that, when you're compassionate to yourself, then you can start working towards being compassionate to others, because it's so important for you to really just create that harmony with others and yourself as well. And that reminded me of a quote I read a few days ago. It was by Mary Davis. She said, "We can't heal the whole world today, but we can begin with a voice of compassion, a heart of love, and an act of kindness," right? So, as he said, if everyone can just kind of have this mentality that I'm going to do this one act of compassion, it really adds up and makes a difference in the future, because everyone has this little act of compassion they're doing, and that really shows in the long run, right? So,
Beautiful.
over the years, Dr. Joseph, your positive social work has benefited society through books, podcasts, TED Talks, and coaching. So, do you have any specific stories to share with our listeners of how your work has touched someone's life and positively affected them?
I'm I'm hopeful that it has touched a lot of lives, but I definitely know, and I can speak with authority that it has touched mine, because one of the things that inevitably happens when you are thinking about stuff and you're constantly thinking about applying that learning into your life and somebody else's life is you shift, right? I'll tell you a little story. One of the students I worked with a few years ago um, had this. So he came from a different country. Okay, so I won't give all the context, but he came from a different country and he was in America for just a couple of months. His language was challenged, and so we were not communicating well. And this particular student um, was not connecting with me. So I'm trying to work with him. I'm trying to help him with his work and so on. And he just kind of avoids me. If I go near him, he shrinks back physically. And I'm thinking, what is wrong? What am I doing that is driving this student away? And I'm getting frustrated. And passing all these judgments about this kid. Um, and but on the other end, there is this other teacher, this co-teacher who's with me, and this kid naturally is gravitating towards her. He wants to hug her when he gets a chance and touch her and hold her hand and so on. And she's older than me. This other teacher is older than me. And so I'm curious, like, why is this big disconnect in the way he is reacting to me and to somebody else? And I'm getting a little bit angry with him also, right? And assuming the worst in the situation. And then one day I hear his background story. It turns out that he had witnessed his father kill his mother, and that was one of the reasons why he was here in this first place, because his family structure had dissolved. And I realized that perhaps he saw a little bit of his father in me, which is why he was probably avoiding me, and he saw a little bit of his mother in the other teacher, which is why he was naturally gravitating towards her. When I had that realization, a lot of my judgments immediately dropped. And I was telling myself, how could I be so callous? I talk about compassion all the time. I talk about judgments all the time. How can I be so callous to his backstory? What if I had removed all those stories in the beginning? My whole approach would have been different. And so as I took away that judgment from my mind, um, suddenly I realized that my actions were truly more compassionate. Didn't have to be forced. I wasn't telling myself I had to be compassionate because it automatically, naturally was. As a dad, I'm a dad of two teenagers, and to me that idea is, that immediately this is all one more kid that has been sent my way for a reason. And things were different for him. After that, he started noticing something, and at the end of the year, this big transformation had happened. This kid who was initially so hesitant even make contact with me was now, holding my hands and say, Dr. Joseph, I'm done. I'm excited. I'm going to go to the next level and so on, right? So that was a big learning for me as well. That as I remove the judgments and the fears about people, and as I open up to people without stories, without and understand them truly, um, I can shift internally. And the compassion that is expressed is not always necessarily verbal; it is unsaid, and it always shows.
Yeah, that was a wonderful moral story because, as you said, sometimes we learn a lot from, in that case, you were like kind of a mentor to that kid, and you really, you learned a lot too, right? As we remove these judgments, then we're naturally more compassionate. And I know that definitely we can use this in our day-to-day lives because sometimes we naturally assume the worst in someone because we don't know the whole story. But it's important for us to, as you said, to give them the benefit of doubt and understand that everyone has something different going on in their life, but we want to just, on our end, we always want to be compassionate and understanding and just not have those judgments because sometimes that restricts us in creating those meaningful connections, right? As we were talking about earlier, it's so important for us as humans, as social beings, to create harmony and beautiful connections with those around us. And so removing judgments and doing that will help us just be a more compassionate person in general. So that's something we can definitely implement. So, throughout our discussion, we've just had so many wonderful words of wisdom and stories that you've been sharing with us. So, for our listeners, we'd like to end with some final words of wisdom. So, in a quick 2 to 3 sentences, what would you like to leave our listeners with as they move on with their day?
Sometimes when you look at the world around you, it is difficult to be compassionate because it seems there's a lot of drudgery and sorrow on this planet. But I think the bigger question for us to remember is where there is all of this hurt and suffering and pain, it also means there is an opportunity for us to be the change that we want to see in the world. So that is my invitation as well. I mean, you're young people, you have so much of energy and so much of intellect and so much of heart. Um, and and so my invitation is remember, it's easy to sidle with the sorrow and say this is the way the world is, or you can be compassionate because compassion is about alleviating suffering. So you can say, how can I be the light that I want to see in the world? And it's possible, and it happens through small, tiny acts of micro compassion every day.
Yeah, that's incredibly said, right? Change comes with ourselves. If we want to see more compassion around us, we should start with us. Showing those like small acts of micro compassion is an opportunity for us to connect with those around us, but make, little by little, making that larger difference in society. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Joseph. So that wraps up today's very engaging and insightful session with Dr. Immanuel Joseph. Compassion is so important in our society, especially in our post-COVID world because it's really what makes us human, right? Being compassionate. So, as you said, Dr. Joseph, micro compassions every day make a big difference in the long run. And you just shared so many wonderful pieces of advice and wisdom with our listeners. So, we're thankful for you giving your time to us today. Thank you so much. For our
Thank you.
listeners, have a great rest of your day. Don't forget to subscribe to Talk It Out with Pratika Karkwal for more content like this. And please feel free to share your topic requests. We'll love to hear from you. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much, Dr. Joseph.
Thank you, Pratika.
Thank you.